Have you ever been labelled a failure by the very people who are supposed to love you the most? Imagine sitting at a family dinner, trying to hold your head high while your parents and sister laugh at your struggles, right in front of your little girl. That sting, that humiliation could break anyone. But sometimes, the very moment meant to crush you becomes the spark that changes everything. Because on that night, an unexpected voice rose up, not to mock, but to defend. And what followed revealed a truth so powerful it would rewrite the story of a woman who refused to give up on herself. This isn't just about pain. It's about resilience, dignity, and discovering a worth no one can take away. Stay with us, because this is a story you will never forget. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Glow channel for more inspiring stories like this. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple navy dress that had been pressed carefully the night before. The fabric clung in places I wished it would not, and no matter how I tugged at the hemline, it seemed to remind me of everything I lacked. The light in the bathroom flickered, a bulb that had been on its last breath for weeks, casting shadows across my face. Each flicker seemed to deepen the lines that had come from too many sleepless nights at the hospital, from years of balancing exhaustion with the endless demands of motherhood. I tried to straighten my shoulders and breathe, telling myself that tonight was just another dinner, nothing more. But the tension in my chest betrayed me. "You look like a princess, Mommy." Her little voice broke through my thoughts like sunlight parting storm clouds. I turned to see Lila standing in the doorway, her brown eyes wide with awe, her tiny hands clutching the stuffed cat that had been her constant companion since she could form words. For a moment, the ache inside me softened. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, fastening the small pearl necklace that once belonged to my mother, back when she still believed in me. It was a gift from my 16th birthday, when she saw a future for me that she has since decided I failed to reach. I forced a smile at my reflection. 6 years working nights in a hospital had taught me how to fake alertness, how to force warmth into my expression when my body screamed for rest. Surely I could pretend for just a few hours more. Beside me, Lila twirled in her yellow sundress, the one we found at the church thrift store after weeks of saving coins in a glass jar. She looked so proud as she smoothed the fabric over her knees. "Will Aunt Savannah be happy to see us this time?" Her question pierced me in a way no insult could. She was only 6, but already she sensed the undercurrent of rejection that haunted every family gathering. I wanted to protect her from it, to build a shield around her innocence. "Of course she will," I said, even though the words tasted like lies. The Italian restaurant loomed ahead of us like a monument to wealth, its stone walls glowing under carefully placed lights. A row of sleek cars gleamed in the valet line, polished so brightly they reflected the stars above. My aging sedan shuddered as I pulled it into the driveway, its dented passenger door like a scar I had long stopped trying to hide. Lila pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's so fancy." "Yes, honey," I said, stealing one last glance at my lipstick in the rearview mirror. "Remember, best manners tonight." She nodded solemnly, her excitement barely contained. Inside, the hostess greeted us with a professional smile that faltered almost imperceptibly when her eyes took in my simple dress and Lila's scuffed shoes. She consulted her tablet, then led us past glittering tables filled with couples in designer clothing, voices blending with the gentle clink of crystal glasses and soft music. The smell of garlic and wine lingered in the air. I kept my head high as we walked, even as my pulse quickened with every step. At the far end of the long table sat Savannah and her husband Ethan, radiant in their roles as hosts. My sister glowed under the chandelier light, her blonde hair shimmering, diamonds catching every flicker. Ethan, beside her, looked at ease in his tailored suit, kindness evident even in his stillness. The hostess placed Lila and me near the swinging kitchen doors, where bursts of heat and laughter from the staff interrupted every few minutes. I pretended not to notice, smoothing Lila's hair as she studied the silverware in front of her with wide-eyed wonder. "Presentable tonight," my mother murmured as she leaned in to kiss my cheek. Her perfume overwhelming. Her words fell like tiny stones in my stomach, casual and cruel. My father lifted his hand in a distracted wave, his attention already back on the conversation with Ethan's father. Then Savannah approached, her red dress flowing like fire as she raised her glass of champagne. "My big sister finally made it," she said, her tone sweet but edged with something sharp enough to cut. Around us, a few people chuckled politely, though unease lingered in the air. I swallowed my pride, kissed her cheek, and introduced Lila. Savannah barely acknowledged her, patting her head like one would a pet. But Ethan crouched down to Lila's level, his smile genuine, asking about school and complimenting her dress. Something about his warmth tightened my throat. As the evening unfolded, toasts rang out. Glasses were raised to love, to success, to the beautiful couple at the centre of it all. When Ethan proudly announced his company's new contract, I joined the applause, sincerely happy for him, even as envy whispered faintly in my ear. Because I knew his triumph had not come easily, and I remembered the nights when he called me in despair, when I helped him piece together a new beginning. Then Savannah stood, her glass glittering under the light, her smile growing sharper as her eyes locked on mine. "To 3 wonderful years with the most amazing man," she declared, "and to many more successes to come. I just hope I never end up like some people, over 30, single, and barely scraping by." Laughter rippled through the table, nervous and complicit. My father added, chuckling, "Men do not want women with kids already, sweetheart. You dodged that bullet." The air left my lungs in a rush, my face burning. I lowered my gaze, ashamed not only of their words, but of the fact that my daughter had heard them. "Mom," Lila whispered, her voice small but clear. "Why are they laughing at you?" Her innocence cut through the room like a blade. My hands shook beneath the table, shame colliding with heartbreak. I wanted to answer her, to shield her, but my voice refused to come. It was then that a chair scraped against the floor with a force that silenced the entire restaurant. I looked up to see Ethan standing, his expression solemn, his eyes steady. He moved around the table with quiet determination until he stood beside me. "That was not a joke," he said, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "That was cruel." Every head turned. My sister's mouth fell open. My parents shifted uncomfortably, and Lila stared up at Ethan as if sensing this moment mattered more than anything that had come before. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. The silence that followed Ethan's words seemed to stretch into eternity. The soft hum of conversation from the other diners had died away, leaving only the faint clinking of silverware in the distance. Every pair of eyes at our table had turned toward him, and by extension, toward me. I sat frozen, my breath caught in my chest, my daughter's small hand trembling as it clutched mine under the table. Savannah's smile faltered, the perfect mask she wore cracking under the weight of the moment. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice brittle, but Ethan's gaze did not waver. 2 years ago, he began, his voice strong and unwavering. I was at my lowest. I had lost my job. I was drowning in debt, and I felt like my world was crumbling. "Do you know who was there for me?" He paused, letting the question settle over the table like a heavy curtain. His eyes swept across his family, lingering on Savannah, before finally resting on me. "It wasn't you. It wasn't my friends. It wasn't even my parents. It was Danica." A murmur rippled through the group, surprise etched into faces that had only moments earlier been filled with smug amusement. I remembered that time vividly, the phone calls at 2 a.m, Ethan's voice breaking as he confessed he felt like he had failed his wife, his family, and himself. I had been exhausted from double shifts, still learning how to navigate life as a single mother, but I had stayed up, rewriting his resume, sending his details to contacts I had met at the hospital. I had believed in him when no one else did. You all laughed at her just now, Ethan continued, his voice sharp with controlled anger. But let me tell you something. She is the strongest, kindest person in this room. While you were busy dismissing her, she was holding me together when I was falling apart. She is the reason I am standing here tonight as a man who has rebuilt his life. His words hit me harder than my family's cruelty ever had. For so long, I had internalized their narrative that I was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a woman who had failed at the life they valued. But in that moment, with Ethan's hand resting lightly on my shoulder, I felt a glimmer of something I had not allowed myself in years: pride. Savannah's eyes widened, and for once, she had no quick retort. She shifted in her seat, her diamond earrings swaying as she fidgeted with the stem of her glass. "This isn't the time for this," she muttered. "When is the time?" Ethan's question cut through the air like a blade. "When will it ever be the right time to stop belittling someone who has done nothing but give?" I lowered my gaze, torn between the shame of being exposed and the strange warmth of being defended. Lila leaned against me, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mum helps everybody," she said simply, her childlike certainty piercing deeper than any speech could. Aunt Cheryl's voice followed, rough but steady. "She's right. Danica drove me to every chemo appointment when I couldn't get behind the wheel. She was there when I needed her most." Uncle Frank raised his hand from further down the table. "She helped Robbie with his nursing school applications, spent hours on the phone walking him through it." One by one, the stories came, tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. Each voice carried another piece of the life I had lived quietly, never expecting recognition. Faces that had looked at me with disdain moments before now softened, as though seeing me clearly for the first time. Savannah's cheeks flushed red, her composure unraveling. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "You are all ridiculous," she snapped. "Danica has always been too sensitive. I was only joking. You can't blame me if she chose to make bad life decisions." The cruelty of her words no longer sank into me the way they once would have. Something had shifted. I straightened my back, refusing to let the barbs pierce the fragile confidence I was beginning to reclaim. "Do you have feelings for my sister?" Savannah hurled the accusation at Ethan, desperation dripping from every syllable. The table gasped, the collective intake of breath echoing like a gust of wind. Ethan looked at her with disappointment etched deep into his features. "I have deep respect for her," he said firmly. "Something you should have too." My parents sat, rigid, caught between daughters, their silence a familiar wound. For years they had made their preference clear, their admiration flowing freely towards Savannah while I was left in the shadows. Tonight, however, their silence felt less like superiority and more like shame. Memories surfaced unbidden. Savannah's lavish graduation party, while mine was a simple dinner at a chain restaurant. The thousands spent on her wedding while my daughter's birth was acknowledged with nothing more than a stiff card. The countless family gatherings where her achievements were paraded while mine were brushed aside. I realized then that I had been a supplicant at my own family's table, begging for scraps of approval that would never truly come. And in that realization, a weight I had carried for too long began to lift. Slowly, deliberately, I rose from my seat. My chair scraped softly against the carpet, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. I held Lila's hand as I stood, grounding myself in her unwavering love. "Thank you, Ethan, for your kindness," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. "I have spent years trying to earn your respect. Tonight, I realized I don't need it anymore." The words left my lips like a release, like air rushing into lungs that had been starved too long. For the first time, I felt free. Lila slipped her hand more firmly into mine, her little chin lifting as though she too had found her courage. The bread was really good, she told the table with a sweetness that drew a ripple of awkward laughter, and with that, we walked away, leaving behind the glittering chandeliers, the polished silverware, and the weight of expectations that had never belonged to me in the first place. The night air outside was crisp, cool against my heated skin. For the first time in years, I walked, not as someone diminished, but as someone finally beginning to understand her worth. The drive home that night felt like a strange dream. The city lights shimmered on the windshield as my old sedan rumbled down the street, but the silence inside the car pressed heavily against me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned pale. In the rearview mirror, I saw Lila leaning against her seat, her stuffed cat tucked under her chin. Her face glowed softly in the dashboard light, innocent and questioning. "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. The question cut deep. How could I explain decades of unspoken favoritism and cruelty to a 6-year-old child? I swallowed, searching for words she could understand. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Sometimes families disagree about how people should treat each other. Like when Tommy pushed Lucy at recess, and the teacher told him that was not respectful." Her little brow furrowed as she processed my words. Then she nodded, the way children do when they decide to trust what you have said. "I think you deserve lots of respect, Mummy." The tears I had been holding back stung my eyes, but I blinked them away and reached for her hand. "Thank you, baby. So do you." Back at our apartment, the space felt both familiar and foreign, as though I was stepping into it for the first time with new eyes. The cracked linoleum floors and chipped countertops no longer seemed like proof of failure, but evidence of survival. While Lila splashed in the tub, I sat on the closed lid of the toilet, letting the rising steam soften the sharp edges of the evening. "Can we read 2 stories tonight?" she asked afterward, her damp hair curling against her forehead. "Just one. It is late," I said, wrapping her in our thin but clean towel. I dressed her in pajamas dotted with faded stars, brushed her teeth, and tucked her into bed beneath lavender-scented sheets. As I turned to leave, her voice caught me. "Are we going to be okay?" I sat back down on the edge of the mattress, the springs creaking beneath me. "Yes, Lila, we have each other, and that is enough." When she finally drifted to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by overdue bills, spread out like cards in a fortune-teller's deck. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I felt weak, but because I finally realised how much I had endured. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes before wiping my tears, picking up my pen, and calculating how to stretch what little I had. There was just enough to cover the electric bill if I pushed back buying new shoes. Survival had become an art form, but tonight it felt less like desperation and more like defiance. Morning arrived with its usual demands, but something inside me had shifted. At work, I moved differently, as though Ethan's words still lingered around me like an invisible armour. When a doctor dismissed my concern about a patient's oxygen levels, I found my voice stronger than before. "No, this needs to be addressed now." My supervisor noticed, her eyes narrowing before she smiled. "You seem different lately, Danica. More confident." Weeks passed, and that difference grew. I applied for the night shift supervisor position, something I had dreamed about but never dared to pursue. My colleagues rallied behind me, offering encouragement and practical help. Ellen from Pediatrics helped polish my resume. James from the emergency room recommended leadership books. Their support filled the hollow spaces my family had left empty. Lila thrived as well. Her teacher sent notes about her empathy toward classmates, about the way she comforted a boy who cried when he lost his crayons. She drew a picture of my family at school, just 2 stick figures holding hands and smiling. She showed it to me with pride, and I taped it to the refrigerator. "That is us," she said. "Just us. We began building rituals of joy into our days. Tuesday nights became homemade pizza night, with flour dusting the counters as dough rose slowly in the kitchen's warmth. Saturday mornings were for chalk drawings on the sidewalk, rain washing away our masterpieces, only to make room for new ones. At bedtime, we whispered stories under a blanket fort, laughter spilling out into the darkness. 3 months after that dinner, my supervisor called me into her office. My heart raced as she shuffled papers before looking up at me. The administration reviewed the applications. They want you as the new night shift supervisor. The words hit me with a force I had not expected. For years, I had accepted being overlooked, dismissed, made small. Now, I was being recognized. That night, my colleagues surprised me with a small cake, cheering my promotion with sparkling cider in paper cups. For the first time, I felt seen. At home, I opened my laptop and scrolled through apartment listings I had bookmarked for months, but never had the courage to inquire about. My fingers trembled as I finally sent a message about a 2-bedroom place with sunlight pouring through the windows. Lila peeked over my shoulder. "Can I have yellow walls, like sunshine?" she asked. "Maybe we can," I said, kissing her forehead. "Maybe we can." 2 weeks later, I stood in the living room of our new home, cardboard boxes stacked against freshly painted walls. Lila raced from room to room, her joy echoing in laughter that made every sacrifice worthwhile. When she saw her bedroom, painted in the soft yellow she had wished for, she gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "You did it, Mommy!" Her delight filled the room like music. That evening, as I tucked her into bed in her new space, I realized we had crossed a threshold. We were no longer just surviving. We were beginning to live. The world had tried to convince me I was a failure, but every step since that dinner had been proof that they were wrong. I had endured, I had risen. And now, with my daughter's laughter ringing in the air, I knew we were building a life on our own terms. Life after the move felt like stepping into sunlight after years of dim shadows. The new apartment was not luxurious, but it was ours. The yellow walls in Lila's room caught the morning light, filling her space with warmth. In the kitchen, the counters were free of cracks and the faucet no longer dripped endlessly through the night. These small changes felt monumental, symbols of a life no longer defined by scarcity. Lila adjusted quickly, her joy spilling over into everything she did. She decorated her room with paper butterflies she cut out herself and taped to the walls, laughing as they seemed to flutter when the fan spun. Her piano lessons at the community centre became her favourite part of the week. The scratched, second-hand keyboard we had found in a thrift shop became her treasure. When she pressed her tiny fingers to the keys, even the simplest notes filled our home with hope. My promotion at the hospital came with challenges, but also with a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. For the first time, my voice carried weight. Nurses came to me with scheduling conflicts, patient concerns, and questions about procedures. I listened carefully, remembering all the times my own worries had been dismissed. When a young nurse asked for flexibility so she could take her son to therapy appointments, I rearranged the schedule without hesitation. Her tears of relief reminded me of my own struggles, of nights I had prayed for someone to understand. "You are making a difference," Martha, my supervisor, told me one evening as we shared coffee in the break room. "Not just for the patients, but for the staff too." Her words sank into me slowly, filling spaces long, hollowed by doubt. Even outside of work, I began to move differently. I no longer avoided eye contact when walking into rooms filled with strangers. I spoke up in conversations rather than shrinking into silence. It was not that my circumstances had become perfect. Bills still arrived relentlessly, and exhaustion still clung to me after long shifts. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer measured my worth by my family's approval. 3 months into my new role, my confidence was tested in ways I had never expected. The hospital faced a crisis with staff shortages, and I was tasked with redesigning the night shift rotation. It was the kind of puzzle that seemed impossible. Too many needs, not enough people. But I poured myself into it, spreading charts across my kitchen table late at night while Lila slept. I balanced schedules with precision, making sure each nurse had time for their families while keeping the hospital fully staffed. When the final plan was approved and implemented, turnover decreased by 15%. For the first time, administrators who had once overlooked me began to see me as an asset. One of them even suggested I consider furthering my education with a master's degree, something I had never dared imagine. At home, Lila thrived. Her teacher sent notes praising her kindness and leadership in class. One day, she brought home a drawing labelled "My Family." It showed just two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands with enormous smiles. She taped it proudly to the refrigerator. "That is sus," she said, her eyes shining, and she was right. That was us, strong, complete, enough. We created rituals that made our little apartment feel like the safest place in the world. On Tuesday nights, we made pizza from scratch, the dough rising on the counter as we danced in the kitchen to old songs on the radio. Saturday mornings became our time for sidewalk chalk masterpieces, our hands stained with colours that washed away with the afternoon rain. In those moments, we were not defined by what we lacked, but by the joy we created together. It was during this season of change that Ethan appeared again, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in quiet support. He visited the hospital while overseeing a new construction project and introduced me to David Whitman, a business owner working on the paediatric wing. David's handshake was firm, his eyes kind, his smile carrying a gentleness I had rarely encountered. Our conversation flowed easily, from work to children, from shared struggles to tentative dreams. I was startled when David later asked me to coffee. I had not been on a date since before Lila was born, and the thought of opening myself up again terrified me. Yet when he spoke about his son, about the difficulty of raising him alone after his wife passed away, I saw a reflection of my own journey. There was no pity in his voice, only understanding. Our first meeting was simple, coffee in a small cafe, but it felt like more. We talked about music, about parenting, about the ways loss shapes us without defining us. For the first time in years, I laughed freely, unafraid of judgment. When he walked me to my car, the air between us carried the possibility of something new, something I had thought was no longer meant for me. At the same time, a shift was happening within my family. Savannah began to reach out cautiously, her sharpness replaced with hesitance. One morning at the grocery store, she approached with a gift bag for Lila, a music book filled with simple songs. The gesture was awkward but genuine. Later, she admitted she had been in therapy, confronting her own insecurities. For the first time, I saw not the sister who had always been above me, but a woman struggling with her own silent battles. It was not forgiveness overnight. The wounds she had left ran deep, but for the first time, I was willing to consider the possibility of healing, not because I needed their acceptance, but because I finally knew I was strong without it. Standing in our apartment, listening to Lila play a halting version of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," I realised how far we had come. The world had once tried to convince me I was less, that my failures defined me. But in that moment, surrounded by the fragile beauty of our small, imperfect life, I knew the truth. I was not less. I was enough. 9 months after that disastrous anniversary dinner, the walls of my apartment no longer echoed with loneliness. Instead, they pulsed with laughter, music, and the warmth of people who had chosen to be part of our lives. Sarah and her daughter sprawled across the living room rug, crayons scattered between them. Aunt Cheryl arranged cheese and crackers with a precision that only she could muster, while my colleagues from the hospital debated loudly in the kitchen about a new electronic record system. It felt chaotic and imperfect, but also alive. When the doorbell rang, Lila sprinted to answer it, her voice rising with excitement. "They're here!" she shouted, and then David walked in, carrying a potted plant in one hand and a plate of cookies in the other. Behind him trailed his teenage son, James, rolling his eyes but grinning nonetheless. David kissed my cheek as though he had been doing so for years, and in many ways it felt like he had. "James made these from scratch," David said, nodding toward the cookies. James flushed slightly at the recognition, and almost immediately Lila tugged at his hand, pulling him toward the piano. Within moments, their laughter joined the chorus of voices filling the apartment. When everyone gathered for Lila's recital, a handful of simple songs played with enormous concentration. The applause was thunderous. David's arm slipped around my waist, steady and sure. "She's remarkable," he whispered, his eyes warm, "just like her mother." It struck me then that this was what family could be. Not perfection, not rigid approval, but chosen moments of genuine connection. I looked around the room at Sarah, who understood single motherhood better than anyone, at Aunt Cheryl, who had always believed in me when others did not, at my colleagues, who valued my judgment, and at David, whose presence had become both comfort and possibility. For the first time in my life, I was not bracing myself against criticism. I was embraced by love. But life has a way of circling back, of testing how much we have really grown. One afternoon, an invitation arrived in the mail, cream-coloured paper edged with gold foil. My stomach tightened as I read the embossed script. Celebrating 4 years of marriage. Savannah and Ethan Pitt. Same restaurant, same family. The memory of last year's humiliation rushed back, sharp as broken glass. Lila noticed the card on the table. "Are we going, Mummy?" she asked, her pencil hovering over her homework. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Later that night, I called Ethan. He sounded cautious but sincere. "Things are different now," he said. "Savannah has been working on herself. After that night, it changed things." I was not convinced. Protecting Lila mattered more than proving anything to my family. But David's voice echoed in my ear later, as we walked through the park. "You've grown stronger. You can face them on your own terms now." His quiet confidence gave me the courage to make the call I had been avoiding. I spoke directly to Savannah, my voice firmer than it had ever been with her. "Before I accept, I need to know what to expect," I told her. There was a pause, then a voice that trembled in a way I had never heard from her before. "I'd like us to try again. I've been working on myself." It was not a perfect promise, but it was a beginning. Preparing for the dinner this time felt different. At the department store, Lila spun in circles in a purple dress embroidered with tiny flowers. "This one, please," she begged, and for once, I could say yes without checking the price tag twice. I chose a simple emerald dress that fit comfortably across my shoulders. For years, I had seen myself only through the lens of comparison. But when I looked in the mirror that evening, I saw someone strong, someone whole. David dropped us off at the restaurant, kissing my cheek before whispering, "Text me if you want to leave early." His words felt like an anchor, reminding me I was no longer walking into this alone. The restaurant was the same, yet everything felt different. Savannah greeted us at the entrance, dressed simply, her jewellery understated, her posture uncertain. "You came?" she said quietly. "Thank you." The seating arrangement told its own story. I was no longer hidden by the swinging kitchen doors, but placed near the centre of the table. My mother's hug was stiff but genuine, her compliment free of barbed edges. My father's words were awkward but earnest, Conversations flowed, not perfectly, but without cruelty. When Savannah stood to give her toast, I braced myself instinctively. But instead of mocking, her words carried a softness I had not expected. "This year has taught me about what really matters," she said, her eyes lingering on me. "Some people show strength in ways we don't always recognize." It was not an apology, but her gaze spoke what her words did not. Later, as we selected desserts, my mother approached. She fiddled with strawberries on her plate before saying quietly, "We didn't see you clearly. I'm sorry." My father joined her, his voice low. "We favoured Savannah. We know that. It wasn't fair." For so many years I had longed for those words. When they finally arrived, they did not erase the past, but they opened the door to something new. Outside, Savannah asked if we could talk privately. Her voice shook as she confessed her struggles with infertility, the cracks in her marriage, the jealousy she had carried like armour for years. For the first time, I saw her not as the flawless sister I had resented, but as a woman battling her own pain. "Maybe we can start again," I said at last. "Not like before, something new." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. That evening ended not with humiliation, but with the first fragile threads of forgiveness. As Lila fell asleep in the back seat on the way home, her purple dress crumpled, I realised that healing was not about pretending the past had not happened. It was about choosing to move forward anyway. 2 years later, I stood in the garden, behind the home I once thought I could never have. The late afternoon sun poured over the rows of flowers, making the basil and rosemary shimmer with colour and scent. My fingers brushed their leaves gently, the fragrance clinging to my skin. For so long, I had carried the belief that I was undeserving of such simple peace. Yet here I was, barefoot in my own backyard, listening to Lila's piano, drifting through the open windows. She was 8 now, her confidence growing with each note. Tonight, she practiced a simplified version of Beethoven's Ode to Joy, her small hands pressing the keys with determination. The sound was not flawless, but it carried something richer than perfection. It carried triumph. I leaned against the wooden fence, smiling as the melody filled the air. Inside, the walls told our story better than words. Pictures lined the shelves and frames. Lila feeding ducks with my parents at the city park. Savannah and me laughing over coffee. David with his arm gently around my waist at a hospital fundraiser. There was even a family photo from a summer barbecue, all of us together, smoke rising from the grill as laughter carried through the yard. It astonished me how far we had come. Only a few years earlier, I had sat at a table surrounded by judgment, diminished until I almost believed their cruel laughter. Now I stood rooted in my own worth, surrounded by people who saw me clearly. The memory of that night never left me, but instead of shame, it had become a reminder of the turning point. It had forced me to stop chasing love where it would never be freely given. It had taught me to build a family out of kindness, respect, and choice. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, asking how my presentation had gone. Earlier, I had spoken to a group of single mothers at the community centre, sharing my journey. I told them about boundaries, about refusing to measure themselves against those who could not see their value. I watched as tired faces lifted, as recognition bloomed in their eyes. It felt strange to be the one offering encouragement, when not long ago I had been desperate for it myself. I set my phone down just as David's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, with takeout in one hand and a gardening book tucked under his arm. His smile deepened the lines around his eyes, warmth radiating from him as naturally as sunlight. "Thai food, as requested," he said, kissing my cheek as he handed me the bags. "And I found that book you wanted." Inside, we settled into our rhythm, the kind of domesticity I once thought was reserved for others. David set the table while I sliced lemons for our water glasses. We moved around each other with ease, like a dance we had been practicing for years. "So, he said casually, leaning against the counter. "Have you thought about my proposal?" He was referring, of course, to the question he had asked on our porch the weekend before, kneeling down with a small velvet box. I had asked for time, not because I doubted him, but because I wanted to hold on to the sweetness of the moment. Now, as I looked into his eyes, I felt only certainty. "I have," I said softly. "And yes, on one condition. Lila helps plan the wedding." His laughter filled the kitchen, and in that moment, it felt like the sound of home. Our lives continued to weave together with the threads of ordinary days. Lila thrived in school, her piano skills growing steadily under James's patient guidance. Savannah and I continued to rebuild our relationship, fragile but real. She and Ethan, unable to have children of their own, began the journey of adoption, asking me to join her at appointments as a show of support. My parents, once blind to my worth, now attended Lila's recitals with pride, my father fumbling with his phone to record every note. There were still moments of doubt, still echoes of the past that crept in when I was tired or alone, but each time I reminded myself of the life we had built, not perfect, not without pain, but stronger because of it. One evening, as fireflies began to flicker among the rose bushes, I stood in the garden once more. David's voice drifted through the open window, mixing with Lila's music and James's laughter. I closed my eyes and let the sounds wrap around me like a blanket. I thought back to that night in the restaurant when I'd walked out with my daughter's hand in mine, believing that was all we would ever have. I had not known then that it would be the beginning of everything, that letting go of my family's approval would make room for a life filled with love, respect, and joy. Sometimes, the greatest victory is not in proving others wrong, but in proving yourself right. I had spent years believing I was a failure. Now, I knew better. My worth had never been theirs to define. There comes a moment in every life when the world seems determined to tell you who you are. Sometimes it comes in whispers, sometimes in cruel laughter across a dinner table. For years, Danica's worth was measured against her sister's success, her parents' narrow expectations, and the weight of a past she could never seem to escape. They called her a failure, dismissed her struggles, and mocked her resilience. And yet, what they could not see was the strength quietly growing inside her, forged in long nights, in quiet sacrifices, in the love she poured into her daughter. The journey from humiliation to healing was not a straight path. It was marked by tears shed in silence, by bills spread across a kitchen table, by the relentless ache of being unseen. But it was also marked by small victories, a child's laughter echoing in a modest apartment, a new promotion earned through grit and persistence, the first glimpse of sunlight after years of shadows. What makes this story extraordinary is not the cruelty Danica endured, but the courage with which she chose to rise above it. She discovered that her value was never tied to her family's approval. It was in the kindness she gave freely, the resilience that carried her forward, and the dignity she reclaimed when she finally stood tall and said, "I do not need your respect to know my worth." In the end, Danica did not just rebuild her life, she redefined it. She found love not because she was searching for validation, but because she had already claimed her place in the world. She forged a family of choice, rooted not in obligation or comparison, but in respect and genuine affection. She became proof that, even when others cannot see your light, it can still shine, perhaps even brighter for having been hidden. And so this story is not just hers. It belongs to anyone who has ever been told they are not enough, to anyone who has been overlooked, belittled, or underestimated. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest revenge is not in proving them wrong, but in living a life so full, so radiant, that their opinions lose all meaning. If you believe in stories of resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of those who rise despite the odds, then stay with us. There are more voices to be heard, more journeys to be shared, more truths to illuminate. Subscribe to Revenge Glow channel and let us continue walking these paths together, because every story of strength deserves to be told and every heart deserves to be seen.